Good morning. It's Menenberg again. By now, you can tell that I'm really letting this whole quarantine thing go, and I'm going all beard in. Hopefully, that won't prove to be too much of a distraction to you. But today, I'm going to describe a little bit more in detail some of the changes to the new rubric for the 2020 AP exam. Okay, in my previous video, you can watch later, I kind of address it loosely and talk about a little bit of study habits and what you can do to prepare. Today, I just want to focus on the changes to the rubric. We spent days on the previous rubric. You're familiar with most of this stuff. I just want to be very clear about what is different from that rubric to this rubric. And it mainly pertains to evidence and analysis and reasoning. Okay, so let's start there. To help you, you want to probably have this document out. You can split your screen. I have a link to it on our PowerSchool page. You can open that real quickly. And the College Board has done us a favor and gone ahead and highlighted some of the changes. But I'm going to go into a little bit more depth in explaining what those look like so that you can actually know maybe how to write those. In later videos, I'll probably go into more depth on, for example, capping. But for now, let me just go into some detail on the changes. Okay, so starting with context and thesis, those are identical. So we're not going to spend time on those. You know how to do those. Or at least you should. Now, just a brief feedback point from your last DBQ. Your thesis statements were generally very good. Some of you can improve still, but the contextualization, however, a few more than a couple, are struggling to give me information that is relevant to the topic of the prompt. You're giving broad historical information, but it's broad to the point that it isn't directly connected to what we're talking about for the DBQ. So the previous DBQ was on imperialism. You guys talked about things like the Columbian Exchange and some of the maritime technology from the early period, the pre-modern period, 1200 to 1450, and it's just not relevant, okay? You can use if you want to use your space and write me 2 pages of just brief history that leads all the way down to the topic of that prompt and you start there, fine. But many of you were just kind of leaving it there and saying there was exploring and Europeans and they wanted land and it's the same. It's not the same, okay? It's not the same. It's a different time period, completely different locations. You don't want to do maritime tech. Okay, so again, for contextualization, just want to re-emphasize the need to really have specific details that are leading us to the topic of the prompt, or at least give us an idea of what's happening in the world of the prompt, not something that's so far back or not clearly connected that the reader is left wondering why you're including that. Okay, so moving that aside, let's look at the evidence points. Okay, so the first evidence point remained the same, except that because we now are working with only 5 documents, you have to use content from 2 documents rather than 3, which was the previous way to get evidence point number 1. Okay, so that's not a lot different there, but notice that in the scoring notes, if you're reading along, this is the far right column, it says to earn 1 point, the responses must accurately describe rather than simply quote the content of at least 2 of the documents. Now, I've had a lot of students who still are quoting these documents. I've told you time and time again, it does not help you at all. Don't quote. There's no point. You don't need it. It certainly is a waste of time, and it doesn't necessarily demonstrate an understanding. In fact, it demonstrates a lack of understanding because you're relying on the words of the document rather than your understanding of the document. So instead, to get those first 2 evidence points, or 3 rather, we're going to talk about, you really need to demonstrate you're getting what the document is saying by more or less summarizing it, but summarizing it in the way that it relates to the prompt itself, okay? So that's point number 1, 2 docs. Evidence point number 2 is using those same 2 documents, or perhaps other ones, to support your argument. So in the previous DBQ rubric, you were using 6 documents to support your argument to get evidence point number 2. 6. Now we're 2. So now you can get 2 evidence points by using 2 out of 5 documents. In case you are math people, that's less than half the documents you can use to support your argument and get 2 points. Okay? You already nailed the contextualization. You already nailed the thesis. So now we're at a 4 out of 10, and we've only touched 2 of the documents. Not bad. Okay? Now, evidence point number 3, and the previous DBQ rubric was related to that outside evidence. We're going to get there in a moment, but for now, it is simply using, instead of 2 documents, bumping that up to 4. 4 documents. We're doing the same thing. We're using the content of those 4 documents accurately. And in addition to that, we are using them to support our argument or thesis. So you're not just saying in document 2, they say blah, 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 blah. You're explaining what that blah, 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 blah does for your thesis. How it proves or supports, or even doesn't prove or support, perhaps counters your argument. Okay? That's how you get the first 3 evidence points. Doable. Very doable, people. Very, very, very doable. Now, word to the wise, as you're reading your documents during the test and in your practice, you really need to be writing a very, very brief summary. I'm talking shorthand, a couple of words, a phrase maybe, in the margins. Now, you're not going to necessarily have margins, so you want to have notebook paper next to your computer while you're reading this. Jot down Doc 1 and just a very, very brief summary so you don't have to reread the document next time as you kind of write your actual essay. Okay? So that way, for evidence point 1, 2, and 3, you have a very quick reference that you can look at and put that into your actual essay so you can demonstrate you know what the documents are about. All right, let's move on to evidence point 4 and 5. Now, there were only 3 in the previous rubric. Now there's 5. Evidence point 4 and 5 are the same as the previous evidence point 3 from the old rubric. And that is, you are simply adding information that is not included in the documents. Now, it's important to note, and we mentioned this in class, but it's important to note that this is not the same as the specific stuff you included in your contextualization paragraph. So don't assume you're going to get any evidence points on that. Those are different. Those are setup points that you're using for contextualization. Those are different. Okay, so for evidence point number 4 and 5, you are giving us stuff that was not included in the documents themselves. So this requires that you read the documents, that you understand them. Now, you don't have to mention every single thing in those documents in your essay to demonstrate that you understand them, but your stuff outside, the outside evidence, it needs to be clear enough to the reader that this is related and it's not in the docs. So a lot of you for the imperialism one did a great job of incorporating stuff about roads and the De Beers Diamond Company. Fantastic outside evidence, okay? It's not in the docs, right? And it was clearly related to imperialism. So it made sense to drop that. And it was a sentence, maybe 2 sentences, and you get the point. If you look at the scoring notes here, it says to earn this point, the response must describe the evidence and must use more than a phrase or reference. The additional piece of evidence must be different from the evidence used to earn the point for contextualization. That's what I just said. So now, instead of earning 1 point for outside evidence, you can in turn earn 2, 1 for each separate piece of evidence. Now remember, on an LEQ, you're doing between 8 and 12 pieces of evidence. You're asked for 2 here. This is not something that you shouldn't be able to handle. You can do this, people, okay? So those are the changes for evidence. If you have questions, email me on those ones. Now, moving on to analysis and reasoning, point number 1 and 2. Okay, analysis and reasoning point 2 from the old rubric is now analysis and reasoning point 3, and it's the same. So we're not going to cover that. That's where you get the complexity. We're going to touch just briefly on that for a moment. But before that, let's talk about analysis and reasoning 1 and 2. This is capping. Okay, for those of you not in my class, you might say HIP or HIPPO or whatever. Historical context, historical context, audience, point of view, purpose, cap, okay? Now, this is perhaps the most challenging point on the DBQ because it requires students to really use your historical reasoning skills to demonstrate your deep understanding of these documents, not just what the summary is. You're now understanding why it was being said, who is saying it, what's going on when they're saying it, some of the intended purpose. All that is demonstrated in the cap. Now, as a reminder, the scoring requires that you do only one letter for each time you cap, not all four, only one, and you don't have to do it for nearly as many documents. Okay, so the new changes here. The previous DBQ rubric required to get this 1 point, you had to do it for 3 docs. Not anymore. Now you get 2 points and you only have to do 2 documents. So 1 point per doc. If you do it one time well, you get a point. If you do it a second time and you don't do it so well, you still get that 1 point. Okay, so whereas previously it was all or nothing. Okay, so this is really good because some of you are only going to get 1 because you're not great at capping, but you just happen to understand what the context of Doc 3 was and nothing else. Okay, fine. Now, again, you have to do more than just identifying. Looking at the decision rules or the scoring notes, it says to earn this point, the response must explain, here it is, how or why, parentheses, rather than simply identifying the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, or intended audience. You have to explain how or why those things are relevant to your argument about the prompt for which the documents are sourced. Okay, so this, in other words, you're saying, okay, the audience for Doc 6 was blank. Why does that matter? You got to explain the significance of that audience. You got to explain the significance of the context. Now, a couple of things of feedback. For the previous imperialism DBQ that you guys wrote, a lot of you are still just telling me the information that is in that source line. So it says source, such and such prime minister in speech to House of Commons, 18 whatever the year. That's not going to be enough for you to just repeat and get the cap point. It is not even close. They already have that information. You need to bring something new to the table. Okay, so beyond just saying, oh, he is the prime minister. Okay, so what? So what is he the prime minister? You could be the prime minister of, I don't know, my backyard and be talking to the squirrels. It means nothing. So why does it mean something that this is the prime minister of England talking to who? You have to explain why it matters. How does that influence the words that are being said? How does it influence how those words are received? How does it influence us as readers in terms of how we understand it and its significance? You guys know this because you do this every day. Remember, if your mom tells you something, you are going to receive that very differently than if your 3-year-old little sister tells you something. Even if it's the same exact words, they are received differently because of the point of view of that person, right? Okay. Now, another error that I saw commonly was when people tried audience. Audience is not as difficult, but it certainly is not as simple as some of you think. Okay, a lot of people are saying things that are very, very broad. The intended audience is the general public or the world or the citizens of England. It is not. That is not the audience. Okay, that is not even close. You are basically saying the audience is human beings. Not going to get the point. Okay, you gotta identify, and there's probably 1, maybe 2 different audiences that are intended by the author. So to give you an example here, if you were sourcing this video and you said the intended audience were people who watch YouTube videos, for example, yeah, that's partially true. But let's not pretend for a second that there's going to be 6 billion people or whatever watching this video. There's a very small intended audience. It's pretty much AP World students, and even closer to that, AP World students in Menenberg's class that are going to be watching this video. And that's important because the message that I'm saying is more or less tailored to the needs of those specific people, rather than just YouTube viewers in general. Okay, it's not just YouTube viewers. It's not just people who have an interest in history or who are even taking the AP World exam. It's Menenberg students or maybe Eastlake AP World students. It's very specific, and that audience is important because it would be a different message. It would be framed differently. It would be perhaps presented differently if in fact it was a broader or different audience. Okay, so if you're going to tempt audience and you're thinking it's just the public, or you're thinking it's just this group or that's really broad, you're wrong. And similarly, if you're thinking the purpose and you go to summary, you're wrong. So that's another error that people make. They just say, oh, the purpose was to, and then they just summarize the document. That is not the purpose. Why are they saying this? Why are they writing this? What is their intended goal? It's not going to be that clear, okay? Now, the reason I bring these things up are, and I'm going to have a separate video more specifically dedicated to capping. But the reason I bring this up is, again, you have two opportunities. You have to do 2 docs. That's it. That's 2 letters of the cap twice tied to your argument. Very, very doable. And then the other reason I bring it up is because if you're only doing 1 letter for one of those documents, or 1 or 2 of those documents, you really got to pick the one you know. If you're trying audience and you're really not sure, don't do audience, or don't do that document. Do a different document. And that's why as you read these documents, it's really important to draw out those things, okay? See what's going on as in terms of what you know while you are reading these documents, because it's really easy sometimes. You just happen to read this document, like, I know everything about this situation in India at this time because whatever. Great, write it down and use it. That brings me to the context attempt at cap. A lot of you, not good, okay? Here's what you're doing. You are writing context related to the entire topic of the prompt. Okay, imperialism, great. Europe was imperializing. Big deal, okay? You got to get immediate in terms of the context to that specific document. Doc 2 exists, yes, in the broader scheme of the imperializing process. However, it also exists in a specific country, probably, with a specific people, with other geopolitical things happening. Maybe there were wars going on right around the same time. Perhaps there was a large conference the year before. I don't know. But you need to tell the reader that you know a little bit about what's happening in the world of that document, not the prompt, that document, to demonstrate that you have a broader understanding, to get that cap point for the context. So these are just some of the brief points in terms of the rubric, some of the differences and some of the tips on how to get those points. We're going to work through some specific DBQs and specific documents to kind of identify how you might tackle those in later videos. I hope this helps for now. Again, email me or message me and let me know if this is helpful or what else we can provide for you going forward. But these next few weeks, we're going to get a lot of practice in. So get to it, people, and I will talk to you later on. Have a good day.